All right. Good evening, everybody. This is Saymoukda Duangphouxay Vongsay, current Mellon Foundation Playwright in Residence at Theater Mu. And you're joining us tonight because I decided to have a cool conversation with some friends. This chat is called Telling the Unheard, Lao, Hmong, and Ojibwe playwrights on centering their communities. I just thought it'd be cool to find a couple of playwrights whose work I love and respect, and to get us talking about why we make the work that we make and why do we focus on the communities that we focus on. And so very quickly, I want to give a shout out to the people who are making this conversation possible. And that's HowlRound Theatre Commons, Theater Mu, the Mellon Foundation, of course, and then also to these two lovely mammals. So I want to, I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves. If you could just briefly do that in under 2 minutes, and then maybe also share what your relationship is to theater. Who wants to go first?
Okay, I can start. Hi, everyone. My name is Mei Liang. Mei is my first name. I pronounce her she, her, hers. I'm a playwright, performer. I say that because sometimes if you see me on stage, I'm usually playing a version of myself. Have been a producer, and I also teach. And so I've written plays including the Korean drama Addicts Guide to Losing Your Virginity, Confessions of a Lazy Hmong Woman. I've done one-person shows like The Child's House. I've also done devised theater work with elders and young people. A particular project I worked on was called Letters to Our Grandchildren. Collaboratively with my husband, I co-wrote a web series called Hmong Organization, which is a comedy that you can find online on YouTube. And I'm also one of the founders of Funny Asian Women Collective, or FLOC, with Mooks. And I guess you can stalk me at www.lazymongwoman.com.
And the funny thing is, you're not lazy.
No, I'm so overworked.
You're overworked and over-empowered. Just kidding.
Yes.
Over-empowered is definitely not a phrase I've ever heard used before, so.
No.
Okay, Marty, your turn.
Bonjour, I'm Marty Strenczewilk. I am a Ojibwe and white mixed race storyteller. I primarily do that through playwriting, though I got my chops in writing through slam poetry for many, many years in New York, where I spent most of my formative theater days. There's nothing in theater I haven't done. So I'm a dancer, choreographer, actor, director, producer, technician, designer, you name it. I kind of just love theater, so I've done it all. I have a primary focus on writing plays that center mixed race people, and it tends to be where my work lands. They tend to center Native mixed race people because that's what I am, but in general, I find that that's where a lot of my work goes toward. I currently have 2 full-length plays, one that is just finished a workshop production out here in Boulder where I live, which is called Pink Man, or The Only Indian in the Room. And so that's at its readiness for production. And then my second one is called Indian Giver, and that's in development with InterAct Theater in Philadelphia and has been for a couple of years now and is pretty close to production ready after lots of fun work. And then there's 5 or 6 other things in the hopper in various stages, a musical, another play, a short thing, so on and so forth. And you can, for the first time in a very long time, find me online because since I had a nice forcing function of this podcast, I finally got my website up and running. It's strangemilk.art. And that's an old inside joke from my theater days in college when people couldn't pronounce my last name. So.
Oh, it's not Strange Milk? My bad.
Yeah, I know. You would think that's exactly how it's pronounced, so.
That's okay. No one can pronounce my name either, and I just embrace it. Okay, let me introduce myself because I didn't do it properly the first time. My name is Saymoukda Duangphouxay Vongsay. All the friends call me Mooks, and I'm a Lao American playwright based in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm mostly known for sci-fi and horror plays like Kung Fu Zombies versus Cannibals, Kung Fu Zombies versus Shaman Warrior, and then I have an upcoming one called Kung Fu Zombies versus Southeast Asian Girl Scouts that, well, 2 were produced by Mu and the 3rd one's going to be produced by Mu because I won't let them break up with me. so I have that happening. And then what's really important to me is that I get Lao people to be involved in theater, either as artists or as designers or some other role, especially as audience members. So that has been like my mission as a theater maker here. And, you know, I guess I'll briefly talk about my relationship to theater because that was something that I wanted y'all to get into as well. I actually don't really remember the first time, but I do remember Theater Moo, and we go way back. Like Theater Moo back in the day did a play that was inspired by my aunt, who was a dancer in the royal courts in Laos. And so they made like a short performance based on her life and her work. And that was one of the first things that I saw. And this, I must have been like a teenager. I just felt like, whoa, people know about Lao people. People want to know about Lao people. And then the momentum just kind of ended. Like there were no more Lao stories for like the next 45 years. But that's kind of like my relationship with theater is it's been an on and off again relationship. And now it's more like we are engaged. We are about to get married, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know what the term is. We are deep in it now, I think. I can't turn back what I'm saying. Anyway.
You sent the wedding invitations out already. So
I did.
you gotta walk down the aisle.
Couple people RSVP'd, but we're having a Buddhist style wedding, so no aisle, just the floor.
Yeah.
Okay, May, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah. So I'm curious, what kind of stories do you write and why?
What kinds? I guess I could go first. I definitely like my journey into playwriting, though it was indirect through Zen poetry. It's always been rooted in the fact that, like Mooks just said, like I didn't see stories about people like me on stage, and so I didn't even know I didn't see stories about people like me because, unlike you, Mooks, I didn't see that at a young age, right? So I remember seeing Reservation Dogs for the first time, being like, oh my God, my whole life I've never seen a TV show like that. How did it take to my 40s for this to happen that I was completely unaware, right? And so my stories are a lot just exposing the world to Native people, and particularly, I would say, Native people who are mixed and Native people who do not live on reservations. And what I find is a lot of the theater that's out there for by Native people that gets produced tends to be focused on it's a lot more of the Native, folks from the reservations, people who've grown up in their community, people who've been very connected to their community. And when I say community, I guess I'll be like, this is how specific, right? Like you're Lao, so that's the Lao community. I'm Ojibwe, I'm talking the Ojibwe community. I live in Boulder in Denver. There's lots of Indians here, right? But there ain't a lot of Ojibwe Indians. There's lots of all kinds of Indians here. And so that bigger community is what a lot of us live in today. Like most Indians are now urban Indians, actually. But most of the stories you actually do get to see are based in the reservation. So a lot of what it's a really unique thing that Native people have, where part of our people live in this one very specific type of setup where they live in reservations, and another part of our people grew up completely mixed with other people that are just kind of connected because you're also Native in urban areas. And so I really focus on that kind of urban experience and in the intersectionality of what it's like to be constantly expected to be something that you're not. I'm light-skinned, and I would be light-skinned whether I was full-blooded or not, because we're Northern Indians from like Canada. And so people, though, think Indian, right? Indian means dark skin and he has big feathers. And I'm like, I don't know. Like I know a lot of Indians who look just like me. And so this intersectionality of both what they expect you to look like, then once they find out who you are, what like how it changes their perception of you, right? Oh, you're a native. And like all of a sudden they think of you completely different and they want to have a totally different conversation with you. And they want to tell you all about certain things that they know about natives, so on and so forth. I find it to be a really interesting part of we'll call it American history right now, especially because people are reckoning with it a little bit, right? For the first time ever, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, May? What kind of stories do you tend to write?
Yeah, I guess I should backtrack and talk about my community, right? So I'm Hmong, Hmong. Terrible that I have to say this, but this is part of my journey, right? Only very specific people have heard of Hmong people. If you live in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Central Valley, California, or saw Gran Torino. Or read the book. We're forced to read the book. The spirit catches you and you fall down. I know. But I think so Hmong refugee community, right? And what I find, I guess our relationship to theater is that, you know, so in 1995, this theater company showed up, was created in Minnesota called Hmong Theater. And they talked about how they were like the first Hmong American theater company, probably Hmong theater company in the world, because we practice a lot of art forms like storytelling, dancing, music, etc. But theater as it exists now is fairly new. So it showed up in my lifetime, right? And so, but what that also means is that there's like a lot of education for ourselves and our communities, other communities, about how to engage with theater. So, yeah, what exactly do I write? I write Hmong American stories. I like to use comedy and pop culture to talk about things like race, gender, identity, sex. Some of my stories come from they came from abandoned memoirs, right? It was supposed to be a book about my life and I didn't get around to finishing it. So I decided to write it and turn it into a play instead. And so, yeah, real life is a part of my inspiration. But I'm also really interested in just creating stories about people who live sort of, I was trying to figure out how to talk about this, but I feel like a lot of early Hmong stories were very much about the war, the Vietnam War, the secret war, our relationship to the war, our lives as refugees. A lot of it was about educating other people. And in fact, in the 90s, most of this, if you looked at Hmong people, most of the work about us was written by typically, white sociologists studying us. So the idea, I grew up around a bunch of artists who were determined to create spaces where we could tell our own stories in our own words. And so those are things I don't take for granted as an artist at all. So I'm always interested in trying to figure out how to tell my stories, part of our stories. I hate saying that because I can't speak for everybody. I don't want to. But just creating more versions of our stories to diversify the narratives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about you, Mux?
I mean, I've always centered Laotian American experiences and Lao American characters in my work, mainly because our stories are not part of American theater, really. The last, I don't know how many hundreds of years has theater existed. I don't know the math, but I just know
maybe
that
a couple thousand, maybe 1,000. I don't know.
But all I know is, since I've been here in America, I haven't really seen very much. And so my thing has been, let's amplify the things that we want to see, that brings us joy, and not focus too much on the bashing of whatever. So I have been really focused on telling stories that, I guess, like you two, that educate not just our communities, but like outsiders too. And I say outsiders, meaning people who are not ethnically or culturally or racially, Lao, Southeast Asian, whatever, right? Or are who are former refugees. And so I think the other part of that work that's important to me is actually getting people from my community to want to be the creators of these stories. There's a lot of like hesitation and shyness around wanting to take up space in our community because, we have been conditioned by communists that we shouldn't poke our heads out and like speak up, right? We have also had elders tell us, don't make waves. because when you make waves, you bring attention to yourself, you bring attention, and it can bring trouble. Or some of the themes that pop up in my work would be like around interrogating empire, or talking about the war experience, or talking about homosexuality. And for members of my community, those are like kind of like taboo topics to bring up, because you don't want to, again, bring ridicule or shame or whatever to your family. But then when I talk to American audiences, they tell me that the type of humor that I bring up in my work feels inappropriate. But then the Lao people and the Southeast Asians who hear those jokes, they're like, oh yeah, those jokes resonate with us because
I want to jump in, Mooks, just because I love what you just said about like the jokes that who the people who the joke is about essentially are comfortable with it, and it's actually not usually that person who gets offended, right? It's usually, so quite honestly, white liberal. So I have a play called Indian Giver, and we had to laugh about this because we're like, yeah, it's a perfect name for the play. We were so excited. We found the name through a workshop process. And then we had this conversation about like, wow, wait till artistic directors read this and they get really uncomfortable and they don't know, like, do I say the name of this out loud? Is it okay for us to produce it? Because it's a racist thing, right? But it's a racist reclamation in just the title. And I've never met a Native person who didn't think the title was A, hilarious, and B, appropriate, right? Because to your point, the offense isn't on this side, right? It's usually people getting offended for us, I find sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have that same experience, but the jokes that I think are completely fine to make, they're looking at me going, aren't you offended, I guess?
Yeah, I tend not to care about kind of stuff because my target audience has always been people who are Southeast Asian and members of my community, former refugees, immigrants, Black and brown folks. So white gaze, I don't know what that is. I mean, I know what it is, but that's not what I'm going for. I want May to share an experience she had during a workshop of one of her plays.
This young, I was going to share a story about this young white man I met in Wisconsin, who I will never look down, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But are you talking about my diversity play?
Yes.
No, but anyway, but Marty, going back to what you said. So this is like maybe around 2010. I was touring my show, Confessions of a Lazy Hmong Woman. I was in Wisconsin for an artist meet and greet, and before the show, and this young white man came to our meet and greet, and he had tears in his eyes because he said that when he saw posters of my show across campus, it made him feel so sad because Hmong people were some of the hardest working people he knew, and I was making them look bad. And I was like, really? But it wasn't just him. Like other people some people thought it was funny, and then some people were just like, they felt like I was making my people look bad, including my own people. So I'm like, I had to say, this is actually me. I'm speaking for myself. It's my life. It's literally my abandoned memoir. So, but Mooks' story was, the thing she wanted to talk about was that in 2019, I was writing this play. It was a murder mystery that takes place at a diversity training, which I thought was a great idea. We were workshopping it, and I had a terrible experience. It was the worst workshop experience I've ever had in my life, and I didn't go back to touch the play. 2019, right? Because it's a murder mystery, so people get killed off, including the white people. And some of the white actors in the workshop space kept taking up my space by saying, well, why would this person do that? And they work in nonprofits. They're nice people. I'm like, okay, I worked in nonprofits, and a lot of the conversation I had to keep saying, actually, this is based on something that happened at this organization. This is based on this thing. I'm like, but how come why do I need to cite sources? And I think on day 2, one of the white actresses came and she said to me, I decided something. I realized this character is not me. I'm like, no shit. It's a character. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be dehumanizing actors, but really in this space, your job is to come read lines. But you're asking me to do a diversity training right now for you. You're also asking me to change these characters. Why can't middle-class white people say dumb things? Just the people of color were saying dumb things too. I'm saying but anyway.
I mean, I had in an early draft of one of my plays, there was some colored language in it, if you will, and a white person has to say some of these words. And I had a reading where he refused to say them. And I like, he refused to say the words. And he's like, I'm not going to say those words. I said, why? He said, because they're offensive. And I'm like, right, they're offensive to me, right? Like, I wrote them down on purpose, and that's why I need you. And he wouldn't say them, so we ended up not doing it. But like, this idea of being offended for, on behalf of, because, like, so I live in Boulder. Okay, so full disclosure, I live in like the liberal bubble of all liberal bubbles. And I've been here 4 years. And one of the toughest things doing theater here, which I didn't expect, is people. I'm gonna lump people. Obviously, it's not everybody. A lot of people believe they've done the work, and so they couldn't possibly have a racist thought, have said something wrong, made a microaggression, you name it, right? Like, it doesn't fit in their idea of who they are, right? Because their identity is so tied to, I'm a good person. You said this idea, right? Of Hmong people are hardworking people, right? So that's an identity thing, right? They've identified that Hmong people are hardworking people. So this goes against that. So this is that same idea where they've decided they're good people. And so they couldn't have said something offensive, or I can't say this bad word about this person. And I ran a theater festival here, a Native theater festival here last fall, and I ran a Native arts collective for a long time before that here. And the amount of people I dealt with on at least a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, we consider themselves very good people, very like progressive. That's why they're coming to these things, who would say things that were so ignorant and so like, they made me cringe. And they were battles I wasn't willing to fight, essentially, right? And so when I write the play, I'm going to loop right back to playwriting in the end, right? When I write a play and I call it Indian Giver, right? And I put in a play sand N-word, right? Or prairie N-word, or whatever those like things people don't want to say, right? But are real insults that really exist. It's because we live in this fragile place where people are afraid to admit that maybe they aren't perfect, and maybe they can come in and not congratulate themselves because they went to the diverse play, but rather engage and go, is there some growing I could do here? Or is there something I could do a little different? So I wish you could say your experience surprised me, May, but it doesn't at all, you know?
But it really told me that it's really important to be intentional about the kind of actors you bring into the space. And of course, we didn't know then, but now I'm like, if I workshop any play, even a Hmong specific play with Hmong actors, I want to make sure that they're people who, they're not just good at acting, but they also understand the issues that are at stake. So that if they have to say words that they're not comfortable with, they understand why they should say those words, and they can opt out if they're not into that. Or Mooks and I were like, we need to bring in, my particular play, we needed to bring in woke white folks who are allies, who get it.
Yeah, that's against the law now, being woke. Can't have it. Can't do it.
Oh,
that's right. Oh God, can't go there.
Yeah,
we're all illegal. We're all against the law. Everything we've talked about.
It's true. Should I move us to the next topic?
Yeah.
I was going to say, because this topic is actually really, we're kind of veering into, which is, right, like how you think about the audience you write. Like Mooks, you specifically talked about how you write for a Lao audience versus or an immigrant audience, as you said. So I'm curious about how you balance writing for your community versus exposing the broader world to your community, because you don't always just want to talk to, preach to the choir, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've gone about it a lot of different ways, but I mean, when I'm writing, I'm only really thinking about the people who aren't historically been invited to theater, which are people who look like me. And so I'm like, what do my people like? My people like films. My people like bad kung fu movies. My people like hip hop. My people like the Golden Girls and Dolly Parton. And they like horror, and they like bad horror, and they like campy stuff, right? And they also like images. They like movement. They don't want to see a play where two people are talking about a breakup. And it's like, just break up, just get over it.
That's the shortest play ever.
My community wants lots of moving parts, is what I'm saying. They want to be entertained, right? And so when I first conceived of Kung Fu Zombies versus Cannibals, which is, I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a very pop culture, you know, silly play, but actually my work is quite earnest. And it's also fun. But this is a play that's about the consequences of war, specifically the secret war during the Vietnam War. If you don't know what that is, please Google it. And this is a war that basically disrupted a lot of lives, like millions of lives, and caused like this great, you know, exodus of people from Laos and Southeast Asia to other parts of the world. And so there are people from my generation and after who do not have information or stories about what happened to their parents before the war, during the war, and after the war. Like the parents, the elders, they still don't want to talk about it. There are people in my community who do not know of the bombing campaigns that happened over like a span of 8 to 9 years, right? Where the US basically carpet bombed Laos. And to this day, there are like over hundreds of tons of bombs that haven't been detonated that are just like kind of living underground. So for me, it was important to educate people and give people this information, but how do I do it to get their butts in the seats? And I know I love horror and I love monsters. I also love Kung Fu and I love music. So I decided to make the bombs be zombies and make, I don't know.
Make your husband create an original album where he spun it,
That's
that he
right.
spun live stage every night for a month.
Yep.
Yeah, he was the sound designer as well as, you know, the one who composed the score. And he did all of it live on stage. Anyway, we saw an overwhelming amount of people from our communities going to see this play back in 2013. And as part of the marketing strategy, we opened on the same night as the Zombie Pub Crawl, which is like a separate organization that plans a zombie pub crawl over like a 6-block radius or something like that in downtown Minneapolis. And there were people who were part of the crawl that thought the play was part of the crawl, but it wasn't. It just happened to be in a theater where it was amongst all these pubs. We also saw, you know, I think something like 54% of tickets were sold to young people, so students, right? And we know that it's hard to get students to go to theater. We also saw that in the audience, there were hip hop heads, people who were fans of my husband that came, or just fans of hip hop in general. We also saw geeks and nerds, people who love zombies and cannibals, they came. People cosplayed, right? And we decided, wouldn't it be fun if we gave people a $5 discount if they came dressed up as a zombie or cannibal? And so in the audience, you would see a bunch of people dressed up as zombies sitting next to like the typical season subscriber. And it was magic. It was so beautiful. And then the conversations that happened afterwards, like around war, around consequence, around like, you know, resilience and healing and all that, it was great. There was a young woman who came up to me and was just like, your play was so fun. I felt like I should talk to my mom about what happened to her. And did that. Like, to me, that is very impactful. Like, that's what I want to hear. You know, just members of my community seeing themselves, hearing their own language, and then like that stickiness that stays with them, which makes them want to have conversations with people in their communities, their family. It's why I write what I write. Yeah. Yeah. What about you, May?
Honestly, I think it was mind-blowing for me to discover who my audience was, because I'll start with a story that happened when I was 18. I and a bunch of Hmong, because for context, I was born in a refugee camp, so I'm part of that for 1.5 generation of Hmong people who grew up living in between the Hmong and American world, right? So anyway, so we were always like, oh, we're stuck between two worlds, you know, whatever. So we were like, when I was 18, we were like, let's write a play to talk about this, tell our stories, and also educate our communities about what it means to live in these two worlds. So I wrote a play, and then we decided, hold on, how will the elders understand this? And so we're like, okay, it has to be in Hmong. And then we were like, hold on, but how will non-Hmong people be able to understand this? Then we're like, hold on, okay, we need to film this. We need to make this into a movie, and then we need to have subtitles. We kept thinking about accommodating so many people. In the end, nothing. It did nothing came to it. It came to fruition, and I think that was the first chunk of how I was socialized to think about my work, which is, and many people like me, which is, how do we educate other people? How do we teach other people about ourselves? And so I think in my mid-20s, I came to a decision that I was writing plays for Hmong Americans who are bilingual, right? And you know, I think every project is a little bit different, but for the most part, most of the stuff I write is really for Hmong Americans who are bilingual. But I think what that does is, I mean, I don't feel like it narrows things so much. In fact, I think it opens up the world, because suddenly when you don't have to say dumb stuff like "nyojong," which means hello, you know, people don't talk like that in real life. Once you start letting people speak the way they're supposed to, tell the inside jokes that they know, live more authentically, then suddenly I think you create resonance with people who can connect with that world. But also, I always think that people who are not part of that world appreciate it, because they don't want to see that sort of facade. I think people want to hear the real tea about your community, and when you let yourself be culturally specific and authentic, then they get to hear all the juicy stuff too. So anyway, that's my general audience. Yeah. What about you, Marty?
I love what you said about the like people, like the audience you're not necessarily writing for, appreciating the fact that you're writing for that audience, and like putting it in this reality as opposed to the watered down version. I'm doing I'm artistic producing for another Native theater festival right now, Spark Fest down in Fort Worth. Every year they do a different underrepresented group, and this year is Native, so I'm helping them put together that festival. So I'm reading lots of plays, and as I'm going through some of the plays, some of the things that have really spoke to me are plays where they've used the language of whatever their tribe is, which I don't speak. For those of you that don't know natives, there are 500 plus tribes, and I speak a little bit of ours, and that's it. So all these other languages, I don't know them at all. And so people will use them, and I find myself doing this too, unapologetically, I guess, in a way that if someone who speaks Anishinaabe were to read one of my plays, there are lots of things they would understand that no one else would, right? These are things that are in niche, that are purposefully a niche, not watered down into, like you said it, right? Like bonjour means hello. And in fact, what's funny, May, is in one of my plays where it's very specifically does this in a way to make the audience uncomfortable, right? Like this speech is very clear this woman's doing it. In fact, Mooks has heard this play. We were in the same residency this last summer, where this woman's like reading this speech, and she's saying like, bonjour, Anine, that means hello. And like, that's part of it. Like, you actually can do the opposite to an audience, right? By doing that, you can make them feel uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
I definitely find myself very akin to the two of you. For me, it's like both a mixed race audience and a Native audience, if you will. The language is only part of it, because being that we are this, I heard this really great comparison recently. We're a lot like Jewish people, in that Jewish people are from all over the world, and yet they're a very tiny group. And yet, so like when one Jewish person from one place and one Jewish, like they meet each other, they instantly have some bond, despite the fact that they may have almost nothing in common, right? And I find the same thing as a Native person. Now, someone's not from the same tribe, they were born on a reservation and I wasn't, and like there's all these things we're not, but there's these certain cultural things that like are the same, where we can bond despite being completely different in those ways. And that's like a necessity thing about being really small groups that have been, quite frankly, eradicated.
Yeah, Hmong people feel very Jewish too. So just so you know.
There you go. It makes a lot of sense, right? So
I go to Orange County and they're like, "Oh, you're Hmong? Come to my house." I'm like,
Yeah. So the like the language may be from one tribe specifically, right? But like the overall feeling of the play and these pieces, these Easter eggs, if you will, are things that Native people as a whole can really grasp onto. And there are a lot of experiences. I don't even. It's funny because I don't know that I knew that I was doing this, but I do this a lot. That mixed people of all types come to me and go, like they're picking things from the play that are so similar to their experience because this living between two worlds that mixed people have to do is so ubiquitous no matter what the two or three or four things that you are that you're living between. I've even found this with a number of folks who are in the LGBTQ community, right? So having to live between the version that people expect them to be versus the version of who they really are. And so that's less about language, right? And more about just like how these certain situations come to the forefront, how the people engage with them, and there's a universality to it across mixed people.
I want to add, thinking about audience too, like I know that Southeast Asians, like within our own groups, we have a rich history of our version of theater, dance, music, all of that.
Yeah.
And so when we make work for a very Western audience or a Western construct space, sometimes my community, they don't know how to act, or that's exactly how they should be acting, right?
Yeah.
Or they say, I tell them, oh, please come to this play. It's called In the Camps. It's a musical. It's going to be at this space. And then they say, where can we buy tickets? And I say, you have to get it online. And then they're like, why don't you sell it at the grocery stores so we can just buy it there? Which is a thing.
Right.
Concert tickets.
Yeah.
Like this is how Southeast Asian refugees operated in the Twin Cities back in the day. Was the box office was the local grocer. Like that was the one that, and so when we make work in these spaces that feel very Western, very like traditional American theater for a community whose version of theater is very different, like I find that to be so tricky. Like, how do we make sure that our communities feel like these spaces are safer? Because I don't think completely safe spaces exist, but like safer. We don't have to answer that. We could just move on. But
I do have a story I want to share that's related to this, though. So I have a friend, his name's Peter. Peter is a first generation Vietnamese playwright here in Colorado. And we met because we were connected through somebody having similar challenges with our plays. He has this play called Boat People, which is about his parents coming over as refugees. And I was working on Pink Man at the time. And the challenge we were both facing is as Americans, I know that all I knew about Vietnam was the war, the end, right? Like that's all I grew up knowing. And so same thing with Native people, right? Like not only do we know a very small section of like a couple of tribes, depending where you live, portions of history, but then they teach you a bunch of wrong history because they're actually trying to erase what actually happened. And so in both cases, we had jammed lots of history into our plays, right? Like you need to learn all this stuff. You need to learn this, you need to learn this, you need to learn this. And when Peter and I first sat down when we first sat down, we just like bonded over this idea of like, how do we sit in front of audiences that we know are not going to be Vietnamese or Native, right? Like they are primarily going to be hopefully diverse, but audiences who are not our of our community, and allow them to learn and feel like good about what we used that 90 minutes, 120 minutes, whatever the length of time was with them, what they walk away with, and tell a great story and be what you just kind of said, Mooks, like when a Native person does show up, they feel like comfortable there too. Like, why are they explaining this? I know this, right? And something I'm going to go back really quickly to Reservation Dogs, and that's why I love it so much. I felt this when I watched it, and then I asked a lot of people who are not Native, and they said they loved it and they really could connect to it and they could watch it, and they balance this line of like, I don't ever feel like I'm being like, I know that. Why are you telling me this? I know you're doing it for the non-Native people, and the people who are non-Native can watch it and get a really great experience. but I get a different experience out of it. So my brother and I will talk about like some of the things that we see in some of these shows, and we're seeing things that reflect our experience that it's okay the other audience doesn't get. So I think sometimes too, I have to remind myself that it's okay that the majority of the audience gets 70, 80%, and it's still a whole story. And that other 30% or whatever is left just for the people like me or who I'm writing for, right?
Quick shout out to our friend Bobby Wilson, who's a writer. And
hell yeah, Bobby.
So, Bobby, where's my job on that show, Bobby?
Didn't he think you were like Dakota or something at one point?
Oh, I often get you know, sometimes I used to wear my hair in 2 braids because when you play volleyball, that just makes sense.
Yeah,
if you wear a ponytail, it could hit the net and you can get fined, right? So I always wore my hair down like this when I played volleyball. And I went to college at the University of Minnesota Morris, which is like a super small town, and it's like closer to South Dakota, North Dakota. And the school, the history is very problematic. Like it used to be a native boarding school, and then and one of the buildings that was there then still exists today, and it is now the like multicultural center. It's wild. Anyway, I went to the school, and I got mistaken for being Lakota, and somebody came up to me and was like, "How come you never come to the Circle of Nations meetings?" I was like, "What?" Like, "How come we never see you? What's wrong with you?"
That's like, amazing.
What do you mean? And she was like, ugly. Why we never see you? And I'm like, I'm Asian.
You're the Asian Club president.
I was a president of the Asian Student Association. But I guess she said my nose made me look native. And then the nickname they gave me on campus was the Lakota girl.
Oh, damn. I like that.
I was like, I'll take it.
That's honorary. I like that.
Yeah.
Nicknaming's big in our community, you know? That's love right there. That's love.
It's love. I want to ask a final question. I know we planned for 45 minutes of chat, and I just want to honor your time. May, I hope you're okay. I want to ask this question that I had assigned to you, but I'm going to ask it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
How have you both uplifted your communities as theater makers and, you know, using theater? Have you self-produced? Have you created programming? What kind of financial creative opportunities have you made for people in the community? Yeah.
So sometimes I produce theater, and this was totally by accident. I don't want to. I'm a writer, right? I don't want to produce. But I found sometimes that organizations, even though I showed up I couldn't just show up as a playwright or performer. I had a usually interpreter, maybe translator, liaison. Yeah, all the things, right?
Yep.
But then I remember there was one time when the turning point for me was I had a play that happened, and terrible turnout. Nobody came, right? And the feedback I got was that, you know, Hmong people don't come see theater. And for what it's worth, it was an Asian org, right? Not theater move. Anyway, they said that Hmong people don't come see theater, and I got very angry. And I was just like, people didn't come because we didn't do we were terrible at marketing. And so I decided that after that year, I was like, let me just produce myself. So I did. I produced, and people came and see my. You know, I walked up and down the street, flyered. I sent out press releases, reached out to the media. People came and see my shows, and then I just kept producing. And actually, this felt important because one, I knew my community best, and I knew that it's true that we didn't have a history of theater, and so I knew I needed to cultivate my audiences, right? So that was part of me growing up with my audience, if you will. But another thing was that I still remember when one of the first times I workshopped a piece, we couldn't find enough Hmong actors. I remember we hired a white actor to play a Hmong guy, right? And so I know that there were other Hmong creatives who hired non-Hmong people, as in other types of Asians, to play Hmong people, and it didn't really feel believable on stage because they felt like the Hmong actors were not seasoned enough. And so what I decided to do was I found money to invest in Hmong actors. I'm like, if I want good actors, they need practice. And how do they get practice? They need to play on the stage. And so that's what I did. So one of my plays, I took my Confessions of a Lazy Hmong Woman, did a Hmong language version of it, hired actors, built in time to do training, not just with performance, but also with like the coaching. I hired a Hmong language coach to work with them. And so I did. I feel really good now, honestly. Like I know I built an audience, because nowadays when I do work, people don't see Hmong people don't come see audiences. Actually, our group, Funny Asian Hmong Collective, has a Hmong comedy show, Hmong themed comedy show that's coming up, and we're like, it'll get sold out. Hmong people are, even if it's not Hmong specific, they take up, they buy at least 60% of the house, right? And whenever I have a show, I know that I can, it's not even about, can you come support me? It's like, what's the next show, right? We'll be there. And so I feel like the conversation has changed a lot from when I was growing, when I was just starting. And yeah, I'm giving myself a, pat on the back for being part of that process of not just creating new work, but creating spaces for other people to grow with me and help me grow.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Marty, how have you created pathways?
So I have a little bit of a backstory in that a couple of years ago, I won a national playwriting competition. I went out to Illinois. It was at Illinois State University. And the director there, who happened to be from my tribe, which was this crazy coincidence in the middle of Illinois. And we're probably cousins, because that's kind of how it works. And we had this conversation, and his name's Shannon, and Shannon and I were talking. I didn't know Shannon then. Now we've known each other for a while. He said, look, this is the middle of Illinois. You're not going to be surprised to hear there ain't a lot of Native people here, right? It's very rural and very conservative, et cetera. And he said, so we have a couple of options. We could cast whoever in the workshop, because it's a workshop and a reading, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. And we had to have actors, or we can cast non-actor Native people. And I was like, do you think you could get them? He's like, I think so. And I was like, let's do that, right? And so he went out, he got a couple of former students. He got a family, one that was a mom and her two teenage kids. I think one was like 19 and one was like 16. So basically we filled out the show with Native people, and then a few non-Native people who were actors, whatever. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had working on one of my plays, for people who didn't know how to do proper ways of giving critique, or like you think about when we sit down and we talk about a play, like they've never done that stuff. They're just people, right? But we would just have conversations about the play, or they would ask questions, and they would ask them, being people who are steeped in this experience, And I went, oh yeah, this is really important that I have these people in the room. And so the first thing I did is I started to dream about, like, what would it look like to have a Native theater festival, because it doesn't exist today. And we were able to get some funding, and this last fall we put it on. It's called the First Storytellers Festival. And it was amazing. It was here in Boulder, Colorado. We were across 5 different venues. We brought in 5 plays, including one South American Indigenous playwright, which was really exciting to expand beyond Turtle Island for us. And they were in all different stages of development. One was a musical that had fully fledged songs, which much further along. One was a play that was his very first reading. In fact, he was a playwright he's a senior. And I don't know if most people don't seem to know this, but it's the hardest group to get produced as a first-time playwright is senior citizens, right? Because people want to get the young person who's going to have a long career ahead of them. And he was so excited to have his first play and a reading, and we gave that opportunity, right? And so first there's the writers. Well, then we had to put actors into all of these slots. I live next to Denver, 45 minutes away. Every March, so next month, we have the Denver powwow. And if you've ever come to Denver and you get to go, please go. It's like 20 to 30,000 people in a basketball arena. It's insane. Grand entry is thousands of dancers. The drum groups line the basketball court. I think there's like 40 or 50 drum groups for grand entry. It's like, you feel the drums like just through the whole place when they're playing, And so like, I'm like, we've got Native people here, right? Like we've got a huge population. we just got to find them. And so same as a little bit you were talking about, Mooks, about like the idea of the grocery store. Like, right, I was down at our local a craft shop where people buy their supplies for their beadwork, their leather work, whatever, talking to the guy who runs that. And he's like, oh yeah, we'll get some posters up and whatever. Then I'm down at our health clinic talking to people at the Indian Health Center, right? I'm down at our family resource center talking to people there. Like, we have these places that Native people gather for their everyday lives. And slowly but surely, we kept meeting more and more Native people. And someone would invite their friend, and someone would tell. And some of these people were actors who were just trying to get their start. Some had wanted to, but never knew where to go. And we had these readings and workshops of these plays over a week, and so many people got an opportunity to be on stage who never would have been on stage before. And some were real green, and that was okay. And I remember we got to have food is such a really important part of our community. And so we started the week with a feed, and we brought everyone together, and we were just in a room with lots of good food from a awesome Native caterer. And I just looked around, and I'm like, my heart was so full seeing this room full of people, some who come from all over the country, some who were just our local Denver, artist population in this room, ready to start the week, eat together, talk, because we're about to go create theater. And my son was in one of the plays. He was 9 years old, and like, he'd never done that before, and we created opportunity where it didn't exist. So that's like on a bigger scale, and I hope to continue doing that in the future. Though how and where it'll happen and funding is always the fun challenge. And then when I'm working, the smaller but actually probably most important thing that I think about is every time I'm going to do something with one of my plays, I'm very, very, very intentional about who's going to be in every position in the room, and how can I empower myself so I have the ability to say yes or no, or this is a person or whatever. And so when I was getting to work, even when it's not my plays, right? I got involved with this festival down with Amphibian Stage, which is a major, regional theater. And I had some questions for them right away about who was already slotted into things and how much influence would I have over where we were putting people as opposed to their people. And fortunately, they're a great group of people. And they're like, no, we've chosen nothing. That's why they've done all the research. They've done their learning like they should. So I wasn't expected to do that for them, but they left the opportunity for my input to make sure we gave opportunity to the right people all the way through. So I think we have this great opportunity, not just in what we write or how we write, but like sometimes who's the director, who's the designer, can I get an intern in the room? I had a couple of high school kids intern on the festival. We didn't have to do that, but man, they were like, you should have seen their faces, right? Oh my God, I'm interning on this theater festival. It's amazing, right? And they were so excited to be there. So I try to do it in little ways too, right? Whenever I can.
Yeah, you gotta help people pump up their resumes, get those scholarships, get them ready to become competitive for those funds.
So that's right.
I'll quickly share my experience. I think maybe the best example is in the camps, a refugee musical. So this is a passion project of mine. I basically spent a few years fundraising. I was able to, let's see, how much did I raise? I raised about $18,000 to do research and like the workshop process of this over like a couple of years. And then I was able to raise about $42K to do the workshop production, the actual workshop production of it. And I didn't want to wait for a theater to help me develop this and help me like figure out what I need to do next. So I decided to just self-produce. And there's a lot of empowerment and like autonomy when you get to do that. So not only was I wearing the book as the one who's writing and the one who's doing lyrics with the composer and the one who's managing the damn thing, I was production manager as well, because I'm a micromanager when it comes to money. I didn't trust anybody. But I was also the producer and the community engagement specialist and like all this stuff, right? But all of this is like very confluent with my work as a playwright anyways. Like I love deep community engagement. I actually won a fellowship to award me for my community engaged practice art. And so to be able to do this it just feels natural. So like similar to you both, I was able to pay people from my community, many who were very new to theater. I mean, we had 7 cast and design crew members who were either very new or like emerging in theater, right? And that felt good because so many of them wanted to step into theater, but just did not feel equipped or did not feel like they had, you know, the confidence to like even find those opportunities, right? Or maybe they went in audition and they didn't get the role. And so to me, it's more important that my projects become sort of like an incubator for talent and also for ideas and conversations that needs to happen outside in the community. I mean, thankfully, like in the camps, we are gonna, I say we, it's just me. Me is gonna receive a couple of like institutional support, like to continue to develop it. Like, you know, at some point I'm gonna go to Boston because HowlRound and Emerson, they're gonna give me a week-long workshop, right? And I could bring a collaborator of my choice or no collaborators, or just go spend the whole week napping. Like that's but what's important is that the supporting new work and supporting people from communities that aren't historically supported. And then also I was supposed to go to France like this summer as part of the Jerome Foundation / Camargo Foundation. It's like the 6-week residency. And I was gonna go work in the camps, basically rewriting the book, writing some of the songs. But I can't go, so I postponed that trip. But all of this to say, I know that my community fuels me, and I probably wouldn't stay working in American theater if the community need and support isn't there for my work.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that's it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I want to throw like a one like addition on you maybe think of it as not only is it about creating opportunity for people maybe like that is obvious, like a director or an actor or whatever, but I've also found these interesting opportunities to expose people to other types of art from our communities they wouldn't have thought of. And so for example, you mentioned hip hop. Hip hop is huge in Native communities, right? We have some amazing Native rappers. And so as we're looking at talent for some of these festivals, we're like, what about music? What about dance? That like, first thing I'll say a lot of times, like, there's so many places we see traditional dance, and that's why people think that's all Native people are, is traditional dance from thousands of years ago. What about modern stuff, right? Like, I know people, for example, that are painting on skateboards, and like doing really cool modern type stuff. And so the more we can even change their idea of what art is from your community, because everyone immediately goes, Native art, I know what that is. There will be drums, there will be dancing with large regalia on. I will hear them singing, and it's like, yeah, that's a great tradition. But there's this wide swath of people doing. I mean, there's this huge convention that happens here in Denver called IACON. It's a Native comic book convention. And it's like it's all about nerdy Native stuff, right? It's huge. People come from all over, and like no one would put those two things together, right? Nerdy comic books and Native, and yet Native people are like, well, duh, we're just like everybody else. Of course, we love comic books, right?
That's so cool. Yeah, we don't just exist in history. We are living, breathing right now.
Yep.
Riding skateboards and what else do we do? I don't know.
Dropping hip hop.
That's right. Any final advice or any parting advice that you want to give to other theater makers who may be in similar boats that we are, or who's doing similar work?
I have a very strong answer to this because I'm feeling.
I feel
it's probably because I'm reading all these plays right now, and every time I go back and I read Native plays, some of them will get me reminded of this. And I think you were the one that said it earlier, Mooks, that there's this opportunity to uplift and like excite and create it's very easy to start telling anger and like attack and go to these places that are like, we've been hurt for a lot of years, right? And there's a lot of bad shit that happened. And like the history needs to be told because a lot of it was erased, right? People didn't know boarding schools existed. My grandmother, all 5 of her brothers went through boarding schools and were destroyed because of it, right? Like that's an actual direct effect And my grandmother was given away to a white family, so she wouldn't go to boarding school, right? So like very direct, important things people need to know about. Also, not every one of our stories has to be trauma porn. Not every one of our stories needs to feel angry and attack. I'm actually very big on inviting in. And I think that there's this opportunity that is missed a lot of times when things get too cynical, they get too like jaded because people haven't really like come to celebrate, I guess, a little bit of who we are as people. And it doesn't mean you can't talk about really heavy topics or have really dark conversations, but you can do that while not turning everyone else into a bad guy. And I see it really often in these stories, and I get the proclivity. I've done it myself, you know, but I think that's when we're most successful. And honestly, that's when I feel like our community is most excited to go see it anyway. Like, my brother literally texted me earlier today and goes, if you're looking for any more generational trauma, I just saw this movie you should check out. And I was like, no, man, I'm good, but thanks for sharing. And we laughed about it because it's like, he's like, I don't even know why I watched it. And he's like, I'm like, well, we feel obligated because a native filmmaker made it. It's like finally got produced or whatever. But I'm like, no, dude, I'm not even going to watch it. I know what that film is. No interest. It's good that it exists. Let some white people watch it and they can feel bad or whatever. I'm good, you know? So I said my piece. I'm done.
White people and me will watch it and feel bad. What about you, May? Parting wisdom?
Yeah, I think about like years ago when I was starting out as a playwright, I remember I was in a fellowship program, and a lot of us, or my cohort, asked the artistic director of this organization, like, just advice on getting produced. And the artistic director was just like, I think if you should self-produce. Because they were like, so many people get stuck in workshopping hell. They have plays that get workshopped for like years and never see production. And so they were like, honestly, sometimes you just need to do it yourself. And so I would also say, give that advice to people, like folks out there. If you want to see a project exist and you can't find institutional support for it, or you have to compromise, you know, they're asking for too many compromises. I would say, make it happen. Do it yourself. You might even do it better.
Yeah, and if you, shameless plug for me is if you need help navigating grant world, or even to get feedback on your application, your narrative, whatever, you can seek my consultation. If you go to springboardforthearts.org, I am one of many consultants helping artists, you know, all kinds of needs and questions. And my expertise is actually in grant and fellowships. Not to brag, but also to brag. And
yeah, you should brag.
I do. It's on my bio. But I do enjoy helping artists. So, and we know that the funding landscape is very different state to state, but
yeah,
you know, that's something that we have. We're very fortunate in Minnesota to have the Legacy Amendment, which is, you know, just lots of for the arts. So when we say self-produce, it might be easier for us over here in Minnesota. Right. And
because we actually have money.
Sorry
everyone else
of the states.
Mux, what about you? What's it? You want to close it out by telling us your advice for other folks who may be in the same situation as many of us?
Yeah, I mean, I really want people to find community and fun to the people who believe in your work and believe in your magic, and people who will advocate for you in spaces where you'll get a lot of questioning. Because I do not have an MFA. I'm not formally trained in theater in any way, but I've managed to make it this far, right? And that would not have happened if I didn't have very different people in my corners. And I have a lot of corners. I am, what is a shape that has many corners? That's more than a pentagon.
Like an octagon?
A dodecahedron?
Yes.
I gave you 12 corners there.
Thank you. So so find people that believe in you and that you could also help, you know, signal boost to, because one person's win is your win is their win. That's what I would say. I mean, I've only survived because of my social capital, to be honest. I'm semi-talented, but my social skills are awesome, and that's how I've been able to survive.
But isn't it also not even just like the social capital side, but also sometimes you just need a bump, like reminding you you're doing good work, you know?
Mhm.
Like having people like, I'm going to shout out Arlene Hutton, my favorite and like love playwriting teacher who taught me. I don't have an MFA either, right? I just have spent a little time with a playwriting teacher, but she's the one that would go, your stories need to be heard. Keep working on them, right? Like just little nudges like that. And like that reminded me like, oh, wait. No. Like Arlene, who's been produced off Broadway, right? Like believes my stories need to be told, right? Sometimes imposter syndrome is real, and like that having community, that part is really important too, to have people remind you your stories are worth telling.
Absolutely. And with all of that, we are going to end. And I just want to quickly say thank you, May and Marty, for hanging out with me tonight and
Oh yeah.
talking about this thing that we're talking about. And I also want to give a huge shout out to Thea, who has been helping us produce this chat. And then also shout out to HowlRound Theatre Commons, shout out to Theater Moo, and then of course the Mellon Foundation, where I'm currently a playwright in residence. And yeah, follow us, find our work out there in the world, support us, support the playwrights in your communities. And what else? That's it. Bye-bye.